what I am here to talk about is how you can build applications in Azure and deploy those applications to any Azure Stack cloud. My name is Ricardo. I'm part of the Azure Stack team. I've been with this project since its inception, and I'm very proud of the work we've been doing, and it's all about bringing Azure to our customers' data center. It's a very interesting engineering feat to compress that scale and functionality of Azure into something that is actually tangible you can roll out on your data center. So that's what we do. That's what my team does. Before I move forward, I have a question for you. How many of you, you leave your day-to-day activities are all Azure related on work? Okay. So those that raise your hands, you are the folks that launch the new Azure app on your phone and use CLI 2.0 to manage your instances, like Scott demo on the keynote. All right. Now, for those of you that did not raise your hand, how many of you wanted to use Azure, but for some reason you cannot use Azure and you wish you had a... OK, you read my question, right? Awesome. Great. So you are on the right session. Now, for those of you that live and breathe, and Azure is your bread and butter, this is also the right session because I'm going to show you what you can do to basically design, operate, and manage your applications in the same model, the same way you do in Azure. You can do that for the private cloud for many, many reasons. One thing that I'm really proud, one of the things that really make me proud of the actual stage where we are at Microsoft and working in the Azure team, by the way, Azure Stack is part of the Azure team, is that we can provide this consistency, right? We can provide, with Azure Stack, we provide the capability of design, manage, implement and operate your applications in a very consistent way with Azure. In our team, we usually say that the cloud is a model. It's not a specific place, right? Which means that for you to really take advantage of the scale of the cloud and what the cloud enables us as developers to design applications that have a broad reach and on a cadence that is very quick, in order for you to take advantage of that, it's a fundamental different thinking from typical software development that we used to do in the past. We rely heavily in automation, rely heavily on continuous integration, all those concepts. And the beauty of the consistency between Azure and Azure Stack is, again, the way you will operate your applications is it's the Azure model. It's not a different model. It's not something that you need to forcode or learn new skills. So that's a big advantage. Now, let's recap a little bit of the Azure platform and where Azure Stack fits in. Azure Stack is born of Azure. Azure Stack is not a copy of Azure. And I'm going to show you later. We are going to connect to a few Azure Stack environments, look at the portal, automation, PowerShell, all those things. We are not copying or emulating Azure. It's actually Azure Stack is Azure. We bring code from Azure to Azure Stack. So when we look at the experiences in Azure, we do have at the top of the stack in Azure a common set of experiences for you to handle the entire life cycle of designing your applications. This is on top of Azure Resource Manager. Azure Resource Manager, I like to say, is like the gatekeeper of Azure, right? Azure Resource Manager is the entity that basically controls the resource lifecycle, resource placement. Everything about Azure is controlled on Azure Resource Manager. And Azure Resource Manager exposes the different services, both infrastructure as a service as well as platform as a service. And this all runs on top of a hyperscale cloud infrastructure. That's Azure. And if you look at Azure Stack, it's exactly the same model. Again, Azure Stack is born out of Azure. We like to look at Azure Stack like another instance of Azure. Azure has the public Azure, has Azure Government, and different instances of Azure in different regions, the sovereign clouds. And Azure Stack is yet another of those Azure clouds. So it behaves exactly the same. On top of it, we have the common set of experiences. Azure Resource Manager is the same Azure Resource Manager. ARM will expose the IaaS and PaaS services. And this is on top of a infrastructure that is tuned to the data center scale. And it's all on an integrated systems platform, which means that Azure Stack is an appliance that you roll out to your data center. You feed power and a network connectivity. And then after you turn it on, you basically have an instance of Azure running on your data center. Same portal, same API, same ARM endpoints. Again, goes back to the consistency that I mentioned before. So why consistency is important? Consistency is important because developing in different patterns or different ways for different environments is very, very expensive. And going back in time, I remember when we first came out with .NET. I used to be a developer evangelist. I sold .NET for many institutions all over the world. And the first thing I would talk about .NET is like, look, there is no more language war, right? You have a common framework, and now you operate on top of that common framework. And the common framework provides you services that no matter what language you are using, you can consume. And I like to look at the ARM model, the unifying development model between Azure Stack and Azure and the other Azure clouds is the same way. Right? You have ARM, you have the same concept of templates, the same tooling, and what that allows you to do is basically maintain the same code, the same way to operate. And the end result is you can go to market faster, and you can address your customers' needs faster as well. So another very important thing when we talk about consistency is there is consistency in the platform, but also there is a very important piece that we we should mention, which is the broad set of tools. And the tooling allows you to have a rich experience targeting these different clouds. So from Visual Studio, for example, you can launch Cloud Explorer, and Cloud Explorer will enumerate the resources you have in Azure, and it will enumerate the resources you have in Azure Stack. You can create a template using the same IDE. The template is an ARM template. You submit directly from Visual Studio, total integration. Visual Studio is one of the tools. There is PowerShell, there is CLI 2.0, there are the different SDKs. So the tooling is what basically takes the consistency to the next level, which is you reach a point where the APIs are the same, the templating is the same, so now choosing your environment where you are going to deploy is a matter of your business or other requirements. And the tooling will help you to target those different environments. And that's the key for you to implement a CI/CD pipeline that really targets the multiple clouds. Right, so I had 85 slides in this first section, but I decided to skip. Poor. Friday, you guys will be walking out of that door. So let's go for a demo. I think the demo will make some of the things clear. And I have to say, for this first demo, this is a very simple demo, which I like to highlight the consistency. So here's the idea. I have an application, and I'm using the term application very, very loosely, okay? In this case, this application is a VM. And let's pretend in this VM I have something running there, a website, a database. It could also be a PaaS, a PaaS service. But for this particular example, very simple. Let's say I have an application. That application is defined on an ARM template. So I took the extra time to use one of the key concepts of operating in the cloud, which is infrastructure as code, right? So I create a template, and on that template, I define the resources that my application comprises. Great. I also went further and create a deployment script that gets this template and submits to Azure. Very, straightforward. This is like the basic steps of any a continuous integration model. And that's what I have here. I have a simple PowerShell script that commands a deployment. And this PowerShell script relies on an ARM template to execute that deployment. So let's look at this code here. Or I'm not going to call this code. I'm going to call this script because it's a very simple script. So what I have here is my code is structuring regions. I have one region that I'm calling connect to Azure Stack, and I'm going to explain that in a bit. And I have another region that says connect to Azure. And finally, I have one, which is the most important. I have the deployment region, which is actually very simple. It just creates a new resource group. You can see on line 53, and then performs a deployment on line 60. Now, the bad news of this code is that I just lost my job, right? If this was an interview, I had lost my job because I had my service principles on the code, which some of you may have written down, and right? Okay, I could be using key vault to store that. But this is a simple demo. I won't go into those details. So here's what we want to do. We have this automation, and this automation, we want to target different environments. So we want to start with Azure Stack, so we will get our template and deploy against Azure Stack. And then we will have the same deployment code and target that deployment code to Azure. So before I go ahead and start, this is the Azure Stack portal. Ta-da! Okay. And I have several resource groups here. And if I go to the resource group list, I want to search for resource groups that I start with HYB. I have only one, okay? You'll see what I'm doing here in a moment. So this is just to show you what we currently have on this particular Azure Stack instance. One resource group. Now, if you look at my deployment code, I do name all my deployments HYB something. So this way we know what I just deployed. Yeah, naming is not my, my strength, as you can tell. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to select this region of code and run that on the debugger. And what's going to happen is PowerShell says you are connected to Azure Stack. And for those of you that are familiar with PowerShell in Azure, that's what happens when you do an add Azure RM account. You can see my endpoints. And then at the bottom of the screen, these are the details of my subscription. one thing interesting, notice the endpoints. The endpoints are all like private endpoints, right? So this is just to highlight we are actually running this instance in my lab here in Redmond. All right, so we successfully connect, and the connection process is exactly the same as in Azure. I'm specifying a service principal, and I'm passing this service principal, and I'm logging in and choosing a subscription. Great, connection has succeeded. So now what we are going to do is we are going to actually command a deployment. A new resource group was created, HYB 305. And at this point, if I go to Azure Stack and refresh the resource groups, I have 305 over here. And 305 was just created. The status is deploying. Okay? So I will let this deployment go on. And let's switch back to Visual Studio. I'm sorry, PowerShell. Notice how right now I'm in a different PowerShell tab. I switch tabs, so I open a new PowerShell session. And what I'm going to do is I need the first few lines of code, so we run this. I'm going to skip the region that had the credentials and the endpoints for Azure Stack. And instead, I'm going to run the region that has the endpoints and the credentials for public Azure. Notice how the end result is the same. So here's the data of my subscription, Azure Cloud, and my subscription ID. And now I can go ahead and perform a deployment. Before I go ahead and do the deployment, let's switch to Azure. Go to resource groups. And I want to search for resource groups that starts with HYB. And again, this is just to show you what I currently have in Azure. As you can see, we have just 2 resource groups, right? So let's switch to our demo environment and now run this deployment code. So deployment's going on. And a new resource group was created, HYB232RG. And if I refresh my resource groups, here's the resource group. And the status is deploying. Exactly the same behavior, the same resources will be created, right? And again, this is a very simple demo. This demo talks about the basics of consistency. Now, with this, we can start thinking on real hybrid apps. Apps where you can deploy to Azure, you can deploy to Azure Stack, or you can also use the same approach to the different Azure clouds, Azure Government, Azure in China, and Azure in other regions. It's the same idea, all right? So consistency is what enables everything. OK, so let's go back to a couple more slides. Now, the consistency of the platform allows you to operate in the same model. Great. Now, the tooling is a very, very important aspect of this journey, because the tooling will make your life easier. You know, I had a very simple example on PowerShell, a very simple script. But when we look at a real production environment, you have many, many PowerShell scripts. You have many, many CI, CD pipelines. So having a very rich set of tooling, it is important. So Visual Studio is, as I mentioned before, We have a beautiful story inside VS. You go to Cloud Explorer, you go to a new project, a new cloud project, for instance, and we bring even the Azure Stack Quick Starts templates on the screen. You can choose pre-built templates to start your solution. All those things that work against Azure, you have the same behavior against Azure Stack. VSTS, same thing. Actually, later on, I'm going to show a pipeline made, built on VSTS, leveraging Azure Stack. And then CLI 2.0, same thing, CLI 2.0, you can connect to Azure Stack as well, and the different SDKs. So the bottom line is there is this consistency on the tooling as well. And the other thing that is not listed here is the ability in Azure Stack for you to syndicate content from Azure as well. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And that's a great opportunity for developers as well to create marketplace items that run in Azure Stack or Azure. And I have some examples on that. Great. So with that said, let's go to the second demo of the day. And for this demo, make sure I'm on the right environment. Yeah. OK. So very important, always switch the screen for the demo machine. Otherwise, it looks weird. So Azure Stack, again, same portal. And let's look at what we have in this particular instance of Azure Stack. So if I go to my resource groups, I have a resource group named Demo RG1. And I have a few resources. And over here, what we have is Visual Studio. And what I like to show you, and for those of you that attended the first day keynote, you saw something similar in our Azure Stack demo. So within the environment, what you are looking at is Cloud Explorer, enumerating resources from both my Azure subscription and my Azure Stack subscription. And if I go ahead and expand my Azure subscription, I have a bunch of resources here. And if I expand my Azure Stack subscription, those are the resources that we saw in the Azure Stack portal. Again, the experience is exactly the same. All right. Another thing that is important to mention is we saw PowerShell on the prior demo. I'm highlighting the integration with Visual Studio. And I could go even deeper and commenting on deployment, targeting this deployment on different environments based on my credentials. So that's great. It's a very rich experience. But the tooling support goes beyond PowerShell, goes beyond Visual Studio. Let's say you want to use CLI 2.0. So let me bring Bash here. And let me find my cheat sheet. All right. So I will run this one step at a time. So what I did here is I configured the endpoints for my Azure Stack instance. On PowerShell and CLI, you have the ability to specify different cloud endpoints. And the reason this is important is Azure Stack is just like Azure, but you get to run it, right? And that means that all the endpoints, portalazure.com, that's the public Azure portal. Now, the portal in Azure Stack, it will have a DNS suffix depending on your DNS or your customer's DNS infrastructure. So you need to have the ability to specify those endpoints. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm targeting a Azure Stack environment. So after I do that, I can go ahead and perform the logon. And let me type my password. All right, so we are logged on to Azure Stack. And it's a behavior that is exactly the same behavior as if you were using CLI against Azure. In this example, we are connected against Azure Stack, and this is my subscription information. And then the last step is to go ahead and, let's say I want to list the resources on this subscription. So fine, I can go ahead and do that. So let's do an Azure resource list and export that to a table. Now, I think the key thing when we look at the consistency is, again, no matter what you choose to develop on, as long as it is something that you do in Azure, it will behave the same way in Azure Stack. So it seems that I'm having some RDP pain here. OK, it's back. Great. And boom. What I will retrieve is exactly the same resources we saw on the portal, the same resources we saw in Visual Studio. And one interesting thing, as this is, again, running on your data center, you can do things like you can name your own location. So as you see, my location here is Redmond. But anyway, the look and feel is exactly the same. Great. So clearly, this was right on time. You see how my RDP session broke exactly at the end of the demo. If I had timed that, it would not be possible. But so far, the demo god seems to be with me. Let's see. We still have like 29 minutes to go. Oh, and the great news, the next demo is on a different environment. Awesome. All right. OK. Slides. A considerable part of my time in this team is to talk with customers. In the past 4 months, I believe I did met with 120 different customers talking about, what you would like to do with Azure Stack. And I get these answers that are very, very interesting. Like I have customers that wanted to have Azure Stack in mine shafts. Azure Stack in disconnected scenarios like we showcased on the keynote. Azure Stack on the racetrack. Azure Stack inside a car. And I have MVPs that put Azure Stack on a backpack. But those are MVPs, right? They do this kind of thing. So let me walk through some of those hybrid use cases that are resonating very, very well with our customers. The edge and disconnected solutions, again, this was showcased on the keynote Wednesday. And this is all about where you need to operate in the same, you like to achieve a consistency model to design, develop, and operate, but you have to do that in environments that not necessarily are connected to the internet all the time. They may be completely disconnected. They may be intermittently connected. And the beauty of Azure Stack is you can implement your resources in Azure Stack and do pre-processing, do data ingestion, and then when you have a connection, you can leverage the power of Azure to aggregate all that data. So edge and disconnect solutions is one of the scenarios that we see resonating very well with our customers. Another scenario is modern applications that customers, for either regulation or because of a business requirement, they have to implement those applications in places that are their own data center. And again, with the ability to use the same type of modern development that you use in Azure, you can target your application to run in your data center with Azure Stack if regulations or other business requirements require you to do so. But the most important thing is that the consistency between Azure Stack and Azure and the other Azure clouds is what enables you to have this choice. And finally, you want to create modern applications that leverage existing resources on your data center, right? The reality is there is a considerable amount of pre-existing systems that customers want to leverage on their modern applications. And Azure Stack can help you do that. You can do things like with App Service in Azure Stack, you can create a modern REST front end to an existing set of services in your data center and consume that set of modern APIs with modern clients. So Azure Stack can be a key component of enabling you to basically rev your existing systems on-prem that for some reason you cannot move off-prem, but you can basically make those systems part of a modern application. So as we move forward, I want to show you how we do hybrid and how we integrate hybrid with a development workflow. And before we do that, what I like to do is I like to think a little bit about how we used to do on-premise develop. It was all about you are developing on that very customized environment, and then if you are trying to push something to production, you may hit issues like your application doesn't work. And again, this is like how we used to deploy systems in on-premise, right? And part of my career, I spent on Microsoft consulting services and implementing systems for the financial industry. And one of the number one things that I would hear when we were trying to go to production, we roll out a new version, and that new version did not work. What is, being a developer myself, like many of you, what is the first excuse that we give? Works on my machine. This is like, this phrase, you notice by my accent, I'm Brazilian, right? But this phrase, works on my machine, I learned that it exists on any language. Because it resonates with you, right? I mean, you all are thinking that either you use that excuse or you had someone using that excuse on you. So stop that for a moment. That was the typical on-prem. What is the beauty of Azure? The beauty of Azure is that if you have a template that you deploy and that template is successful, what happens the next time you deploy the template? It works, right? But then, to me, you know what is the even better feature of templates and ARM? There is no such thing as it kind of works. Either works or it doesn't work because maybe you are targeting a region where that particular service version is not available. What's going to happen in that scenario? The deployment won't be successful, right? That's Azure. That's the beauty of Azure. And even a failed deployment is better than a deployment that works kinda, right? Because you never know where kinda means and what is broken. So going back to the typical premise workflow, that's what happened, right? And then you had to fix that dependency and then redeploy, all those things that you know how it works. Now the cloud eases the adoption of DevOps practices. And that's what Azure Stack brings to you. It makes it easy for you to adopt DevOps, either in your cloud, running Azure Stack, or on the Microsoft cloud. Because again, you have the consistency, you have the same way to develop, deploy, and operate. And the power of DevOps plus Azure Stack is enabling on-prem development in the same way as you do in the cloud. And that's one of the things that I'm really proud that we are doing, because we are basically allowing our developers on-prem to operate in the same way as they do in the public cloud. All right, so let's look at another demo here. CI/CD pipeline. Okay, a couple of things. Let me refresh my dashboard. You are looking at a VSTS dashboard of the Fresh Produce application. This is the application that one of my co-workers developed. And a couple of things here. Let me open some new tabs here. And also, let me check. All right. Let me check my connectivity here. Let's VPN and see what happens. If not, I have an amazing dance, act that you love it. All right. Let's try again. Okay. Let's see where we are. Awesome. I have the right RDP session here. Sounds good. Okay, bear with me, okay? So here's what we are doing. I have an RDP session, as you can see, connecting to a Azure Stack environment that is on my office. And the reason I'm showing you the Azure Stack environment is I want to show you this thing is live, okay? And basically, what I have is the Azure Stack portal. And in that particular Azure Stack, I have a few resources here. And there's a resource group named TFS CI/CD demo, as you can see. And there is a web application, which you can tell it's running in my private cloud based on the IP address, right? The IP address already tells you this is running locally. Okay? Great. So this is my on-prem stuff, my on-prem infrastructure. So what I like to show you is I do have Azure Stack on-prem. And I have Azure as well. And you are looking at the dashboard on VSTS. and a couple of web apps running in Azure. And as you can see by the IP address, this is public on the public internet. So here's the scenario. Our operations, the operations on the fresh produce company, are worldwide, right? We have developers all over the globe, in Redmond, in Brazil, and many other places over the world. And these developers work around the clock. So it's a 24/7 operation. And they rely on the same CI/CD pipeline, which makes sense because everyone is working on the same application. But we have customers that have a requirement to run their production application in Azure Stack because they are running in locations that Azure is not available. Okay? So how can we get a CI/CD pipeline that, based on my changes, builds and deploy a staging environment, then builds and deploy a production environment all in Azure for my global teams, and then deploys, after successful testing, deploys that in Azure Stack? And that's what I'm going to show you. So here's my, my dashboard. And if we explore this and look at the releases and look at my release definition and my pipeline, you see that we have different environments. And if I go and look at a particular release, I have a few tests on the left side, which is pre-production in Azure, production in Azure, and production in Azure Stack. And then there are many steps on these environments. But if we look closely, when we look at the parameters I'm passing in some of those steps, I'm specifying, hey, this is the cloud name, this is the cloud I want to target, these are my credentials. This is all parameterized using variables. Typical VSTS flow. So what happens is, when I go to the code and make any change to the code and push those changes, I'm going to kick a build on pre-production. If the build passes, it goes to production. And finally, it goes to Azure Stack. And the way we are going to look at this is pre-prod and prod. It's the same website right now. The change I'm going to make is a very simple change. We are going to add the cart functionality to this website. And basically, we are going to refresh the screen and see this build propagating all the way to Azure Stack, right? And then the end result is here's my Azure Stack environment. Here's the app running in Azure Stack. And eventually, the cart functionality will also be showing up in Azure Stack. You guys want to give that a try? So let's do this. This is the main page of the application. I already have selected a block of code that enables or disables the cart, and I just uncommented that. So now let's commit. And let's push. Let's go back to our dashboard. And we now have a build running. And that build is running where? Pre-production in Azure. So we wait for this build to finish, and we will see the changes being propagated in the environment. While that happens, a few things to notice. When I show you the actual release definition, there were 3 environments, right? And within that environment, there were some scripts to prepare the web application, to upload the resources. And the way we are able to achieve this deployment to different environments is by basically using properties for things like the Azure endpoints, your credentials, your subscription ID. And the reason I'm bringing this up is, sometimes it takes an extra effort for you to be able to go and parameterize your entire process. But after you do that, the gain is clear, right? Because you can quickly target these environments without much effort. So let's see how our build is going. So pre-production in Azure is updated. And if I refresh my app, it's still pushing. So we'll let it work, but eventually it will flow all the way. So as I mentioned before, the consistency of the platform and the tooling will allow you to achieve this kind of pipeline that targets the different clouds. Also, you could do things like, based on some type of monitoring, you could scale the deployment on more instances if you need. So all these, being able to create a deployment that is dynamic, that's the beauty of creating a pipeline like this. All right, so let's refresh. So pre-production has the cart now. And if we go ahead here and refresh our dashboard, we will see the deployment now is in production in Azure, and eventually we will see it in Azure Stack. So what I will do is we will move forward with some slides, and we will come back in this environment to see the end result. Before we do that, this is Azure Stack, and see how the web app doesn't have a cart yet. All right? So let's take a look at some quick slides, and we'll go back to this. Great. So I talk about the consistency and the happy path, right? Everything you saw, the demos, are all happy path, except the RDP connection that dropped. But come on, I can take an RDP connection drop in my demos, right? But let's talk about some things that you have to look for, and some things that may prevent you to achieve what I just achieved. And the first few things that I like you to keep in mind is, things to avoid. Avoid hard-coded endpoints, which means that when you are connecting through PowerShell, for example, make sure that you provide a way that you can parameterize your endpoints and target different clouds. Also, never assume that content exists. And what is content? VM images, right? Marketplace items. All those things, they may or may not exist in a given region, and they may or may not exist in Azure Stack. And then the beauty of that is that there are ways for you to programmatically collect that information, right? And another very important thing, avoid using unavailable features, because there are, Azure has a very diverse set of services. Not every single service will be available in Azure Stack in the first release. But the beauty of this is that you can check for content, you can check for capability as well, all in a programmatic way. So for content, if you are using in your application Windows Server 2016, image, or a Ubuntu image, a CentOS image, CoreOS, you name it, ensure that that content exists in your Azure Stack instance. Syndication is very helpful. And what syndication allows you is, from the Azure Stack management, you have a selection of marketplace items that, as the Azure Stack admin, you can select those marketplace items for your tenants to consume. When we talk about templates, right, make sure that in the templates, locations are parameterized. Don't hard code your deployments to East US or West US. Because, again, when you are running this in Azure Stack, as you remember from some of my demos, you could be running on different locations. And be flexible with VM sizes, NOS images, VM sizes. Some sizes are not available in Azure Stack. So then, again, there is a way for you to query this at runtime and choose the right sizes. So from a deployment perspective, make sure that you use parameter files. When you can, rely on the tooling like I did with VSTS, Visual Studio. We do have a GitHub repository called Azure Stack Tools that basically provides tools for you to easily connect to Azure Stack and do most of the first step actions like populating the marketplace and things like that. Authentication, highly recommend to use service principals. So this way, you don't have to keep username and passwords on your code. So one thing very important, API profiles. This is something that came out in PowerShell recently, and it's part of the PowerShell Bootstrapper module. And also, you see API profiles being surfaced in other tools. And basically, what API profiles is a way to manage the version differences between Azure and Azure Stack. In this way, from a PowerShell perspective, for example, when you do an install module, you can just say install module and then use Azure RM profile, and then you select a profile that, that has the right versions and support the right resources for Azure Stack and Azure. So that's a handy way for you as a developer to not have to worry with the different in resources and version of the resources. So with those things in mind, you can really use the consistency to create those systems that target the different clouds. And with that said, I want to go back to our demo because I'm looking here at my other screen, and the pipeline has completed. So let's take a look at that. All right, so this is the Fresh Produce app, which I refresh while I was talking. And you can see this is my private address. And now we have the cart up and running. If we go back to the dashboard and refresh, all the builds look healthy. All the environments look healthy. And this is an example of this integrated pipeline that you can target the different clouds. So with that said, what I want to do is I just want to bring some remaining slides on how you can start today. So a couple of things. Azure Stack is available as the technical preview 3 is something that you can download and deploy on your own data center today. That's Azure Stack Technical Preview 3. If you, for some reason, are not able to deploy Azure Stack because you don't have the hardware to do that, you can start with Azure. And there are a couple of tools that are very important for you to get started today with Azure Stack. So that is the template validator and the policy module. The template validator is a tool that gets an ARM template and tells you if that ARM template has any resource that is incompatible with Azure Stack. That's helpful for you to understand if there is any resource or any version you are specifying on that template that is not supported in Azure Stack yet. And lastly, the policy module. This is pretty sweet. The policy module, what it does is the policy module constrains your subscription to support the versions that are available in Azure Stack. So your subscription in Azure looks like a subscription in Azure Stack. So that's very, very handy for you to get started working in Azure, targeting Azure Stack. So what to do next? Read the docs. We also have a great white paper on Azure Stack overview. I highly recommend. There is content just off from the press, which is the CI/CD walkthrough. And this is, I highly recommend you looking at this. This was put together by our great content team. And basically, the demo you saw, the CI/CD demo, if you want to replicate that on your own, read this walkthrough, and we tell you how to do that. You can also get information on how to deploy Azure Stack at aka.ms/Azure Stack. You can also look at the Azure, GitHub. We have several templates and quick starts for Azure Stack. Also, the past services for Azure Stack. And you can start working on hybrid apps. There is guidance at aka.ms/design hybrid apps. And lastly, please complete the evaluation. If you like what you saw, great. If you don't like it, don't. No. Okay. Do the evaluation anyway. I know who you are, okay? But yeah, please complete the evaluation. And I want to wrap up with a huge thank you. Most of you stay in the room. And to me, that's what, when I woke up today, that's what drove me here. Hopefully the information I provide, it was useful to you. Thank you for your time. We are out of time, but I will be in the stage, and I would love to talk with you. You can come to the stage, and we can continue the conversation. If not, enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you so much.